This is Dr. Goodin with Understanding Diversity in the Classroom. Of course, this is becoming more and more of an issue that we need to pay attention to, and that our society is paying more and more attention to. So let's look at an example. What would you do? Your high school classes are about equally divided among three groups: African Americans, Asians, and Latinos. Apparently, no white people at this school. Students from each of the three groups seem to stick together, rarely making friends with other students from outside their groups, right? When you ask people to select partners for projects, the divisions are usually on ethnic lines. At times, there are insults exchanged between the groups, and the atmosphere of the class is getting tense. Often the Asian or Latino students communicate in their native language, one you don't understand, and you assume that the joke is on you because of the looks and laughs directed your way. Think about how you'd handle the situation. What would your goals be in working on this problem? And I'd say, just to point out, it shouldn't be about you. It should be about the students and the atmosphere. So think about that. Feel free to pause, think about it. Who are the students in the classroom? Well, let's take a look. One child in three is born to unmarried parents. One child and these are outdated. I'm going to use the word worse than this. It's more exaggerated now. One child in five is born to a mother who did not graduate from high school. One child in three lives with a single parent, usually a working mother. One child in 83 will be in state or federal prison before age 20. You've got that to look forward to. What does this tell us about ourselves? Are we doing a bad job? I don't know. So, take that in. Unmarried parents, lack of some lack of educated parents. That plays a huge role in what we call cultural capital and what the parents are able to hand down to their students. A working mother means a mother without perhaps as much time. And then where are they ending up? 1 in 83. That seems like a lot. So, oh, there is another line there. What does this tell us about ourselves as you guys, many of you, plan to be future teachers? Well, you are future teachers, all right? Pre-service teachers. Why is it important to understand diversity in the classroom? Well, students differ based on who they are: experiences, abilities, personality, gender, socioeconomic status, nationality, religion, ethnicity, and there are others we'll get into in a bit. Expert teachers will adapt. If you're an expert teacher, you will learn to adapt. An expert teacher, instructor, trainer, whatever you may be, you will understand what's going on as well as you can. You will connect the dots. You will connect the people. Students in the classroom, about 50-50 on girls on gender. 40% of our students are in free and reduced lunch programs. 20% are in ELL programs. 13% are in special ed programs. And there are group differences that we must pay attention to. The culture, the ethnicity, the language, socioeconomic status is probably the biggest one that I'll point out that probably leads to the most differences. And then, of course, gender is always an issue. So we have these stereotypes about groups. And a stereotype is a rigid, overly simplistic, and inevitably inaccurate representation of any particular group of individuals. While saying that, I would also say it's very useful. Can be very useful as long as we don't try to apply it to everybody. As long as we account for, this is what I think you may be like, but let me learn about you individually. What will expert teachers never do in the context of a stereotype? They will not assume, right? Culture, ethnic, and racial diversity. Culture is the knowledge, attitudes, values, and behaviors that characterize a group of people. What they know, their attitudes towards things, their values, what they value, and how they generally behave. Ethnicity is a little bit different. Individuals' common place of origin, they're from the same place. Often they share a culture, but not necessarily. And then race is a category of people who share biologically transmitted traits. Often the same ethnicity, often have the same culture, but they share the same skin color, hair texture, things like this. Culture shock is when we're thrown into a culture we're not familiar with. That is sort of uncomfortable. Anxiety and confusion felt when people have to operate within an entirely different culture or social environment, like in a foreign country, or in the North when we're used to the South. When the rules are not clear, it becomes uncomfortable. There's a lot of uncertainty, and we often miss the way things were. You've heard of homesickness. Part of that may be due to culture shock, depending on how away from your comfort zone you are. We have language differences that matter. 8% of public school students speak little or no English. I would say it's higher than that now. Dialects, a special form of a language with distinctive pronunciations and grammatical structures. People speak different dialects within languages. And then we have communication differences, various verbal and nonverbal communications that differ between cultures. So the way we speak, both out loud and non-verbally. In other words, let's think about some cultures will stand closer to each other. In some Middle Eastern cultures, two men will walk down the road together holding hands and will not be homosexual. There are so many customary differences between cultures, communication differences, things that are considered polite, things that are rules and guides, and things that are considered to be the norm, where they would not be in other cultures or situations. Examples of communication differences, I've just spoken of them. Think of your own so that you can personalize all this information. And so we want cooperation versus competition, and there is a difference. Competition is not always bad, though. We're going to see group versus individual achievement if we can. We want the group to achieve together. We want to facilitate cooperation above competition if possible. And we want to realize that in the diversity of cultures, we're going to have different time orientations. There's going to be people from different parts of the world who move at a faster pace. Even think within the United States, the northern part of the country. Think New York City versus Athens, Alabama. There's going to be a faster pace of movement and thought in New York City, more of a feeling that we need to be in a hurry. And in different time management techniques. Set schedules may differ. Starting and ending dates may differ. Deadlines. But overall, just the idea and perspective toward these things. And there are some stereotypes about cultures that have different viewpoints on this. The South is considered sort of a slower culture, whereas the North is faster. Rural communities, often you think of just we'll get to it when we get to it, and sort of, but there's also some enjoyment in that, and we need to understand that within each difference there is commonly, and we may not be able to appreciate it ourselves as individuals, but we need to understand that it belongs to whoever's culture It is. Okay, and because it belongs to them, it's special, first of all. And secondly, it may be special anyway. There may be something about being in the rural environment, for instance. When I go home to the small town I grew up in, things move slower, and I slow down and I think more, and I I appreciate different things. I appreciate the sunset more often. Whereas, you know, if I go to the New York City lifestyle, not the New York City, but the lifestyle there, and I've been there, it's fast paced. I need to stay busy the whole time probably. I'll be around people who are busier, lots of tourists, of course, and I'll get to experience that as well, and that will be special in its own way. Of course, I may have a preference, and that is okay. There's going to be different family and worldviews with different priorities, different academic versus traditional values. Okay, and note that academic values tend to be somewhat consistent. So different universities throughout the United States, for instance, let's say we all sort of have this idea of like learning is good, and learning should be done this way. That may conflict with a cultural value or a traditional value. Different behaviors versus beliefs may take place within families and worldviews. So understand that sometimes what is taught at home may conflict with what is sort of the norm or the culture or what is valued in the classroom. Approaches to teaching in the culturally diverse classroom. There's this idea of the self-fulfilling prophecy. Low expectations from minority students that they're going to perform poorly normally predict that they actually confirm that. So the more you expect it, the more it's confirmed. So teachers often think about it this way. It actually has to do with the teacher's self-efficacy for students, and seeing maybe a minority student who especially if there's a bias towards that minority, may perceive that this minority student will not perform as well. Well, guess what? As teachers and instructors, trainers, we're less likely to spend time and attention training, advising, instructing, asking questions, interacting with the students that we do not think will perform as well. We predict they will not perform as well, so we don't try as hard to teach them. And guess what? They don't perform as well. And we like to say that we knew that was going to happen. Remember, it's that hindsight bias. But in actuality, many times we are just fulfilling our own prophecy. It's a self-fulfilling prophecy. Multicultural education, a wide variety of programs and practices related to educational equity, equality basically, women, ethnic groups, language, minorities, low-income groups, and people with disabilities. We want multicultural education. We can take advantage of all the differences and learn. Not only is it just a way to make ourselves more cultured, more knowledgeable about our world, but in today's world, it's actually advantageous to our marketability as graduates, as people with diplomas, and to our students. The more they know about the world, that can actually be sold in terms of working with foreign affairs, working in the political system, working with anybody. We're becoming more and more of a multicultural environment in society. And so the more we know about other cultures, the more we know how to speak other languages, the more multilingual we are, the more we can have that as a marketable skill. Characteristics of effective multicultural teachers: caring for all students, hopefully equally, clear learning objectives. This needs to be the same for all students. Communicate high expectations. Monitor progress and provide instructional methods. And give opportunities for active learning. We want students to be able to put into practice what they are learning from their textbooks. And if nothing else, a student will be able to sense when a teacher is committed to the learning process, when the teacher is going to show up every day and give everything they have. Of course, materials and practices need to be culturally relevant. And the teacher, it helps, of course, new teachers can be great, but it helps when a teacher is highly experienced. The more experienced, hopefully, the more they learn their lesson. Do not become an experienced teacher who has not learned his or her lessons. Always seek to improve your own ways of doing things, your own ways of interacting with students and providing lessons, and rethinking the way you do things. Language diversity. Of course, there are language minorities. A minority group whose primary language is different than that of the majority group. In 1979, this was about 9% of students. 2004, 19%. 2026, we predict about 25% of students. I would guess maybe even higher. In which language should English language learners be taught? Of course, sort of the assumption, and this is somewhat of a political battle, the assumption is that they should be taught in English. Socioeconomic status is a huge issue. I need you to understand it and understand that people come from, of course, different cultures, ethnicities, races, but when it comes down to, our true differences are not about what race you came from or culture or ethnicity, but a lot of those groupings end up producing a certain socioeconomic status that is the true reason for why grades suffer, why families act differently, why values are different. It's a categorization of individuals based on their economic, educational, and occupational status. Okay? They're more likely to do this sort of job. They're more likely to have this level of education. They're more likely to make this amount of money. So what does it predict? Well, I'd say pretty much everything. Let's take a look. Among other things, U.S. unemployment rate and poverty rates by age. Okay, we're looking at poverty as a sign of socioeconomic status. And let's just take a look at the green and the red lines. You see that the green especially is highly correlated with the unemployment rates. Let's take a look at health, resources, home support, and stimulation. Okay, they get different levels of health care. With lower socioeconomic status, you're going to be able to, you're not going to be able to afford the same quality of health care. Of course, in the recent Affordable Care Act, there has been some, at least, discussion of trying to improve that. It's yet to be seen how much improvement will come from that, but it is something that needs to happen to provide more of an equal share of healthcare to our individuals, and something that we can all work for and try to help each other out. Some would prefer, and I would agree with this sentiment, that individuals be responsible for their own health and progress. But we also need to keep in mind the idea that when individuals do not do it, or churches or community organizations do not take care of the health of others, then it becomes a taxpayer issue or a government issue. And so it's really up to us as voters and citizens to really decide how things go. We have different resources based on our socioeconomic status. There's going to be different home support. If we have a working mother, a single mother, a single father, we're going to have different levels of social support, energy, opportunity to engage, opportunity to be homeschooled in some situations, and more or less stimulation from parents based on basically, if you're working 2 jobs instead of one, that's a lot of hours that you may not be spending with your child, or one parent may not be spending with the child. Teacher expectations towards socioeconomic groups are a big issue. And then looking at students who are at risk is a big deal. Of course, the lower socioeconomic status, the more at risk the student is likely to be. How would you support students at risk? What would you do? Of course, you don't want to make it too public. You don't want to embarrass your students. But you do want to be encouraging and supportive. You will not always know what's going on at home, but you will pay attention to more than just the academic lives of your students. We'll talk about that in probably the very last chapter, social, personal, and moral development, as sort of a way to cap off the course and think about going beyond the academic learning. Gender and sex diversity. This is becoming more and more of an issue in today's culture. Traits and behaviors that a particular culture believes to be appropriate for men and women. Those are changing. Sex is the biological difference of men and women. And nature versus nurture is debated among gender and sex diversity. Gender socialization is teaching the behaviors and attitudes considered appropriate for a given sex. Of course, there are gender differences in the classroom, especially if we stick with the traditional male and female categories. We have emotions and behaviors attributed stereotypically to males versus those attributed to females. And as a society, I would say we're becoming more androgynous. In other words, females are becoming more masculine, males are becoming more effeminate. I'm not saying they're turning into that. I'm just saying that there's becoming less difference. In fact, males and females are much more alike than different. We're very alike, but we can sort of, put our finger on many differences, and we can emphasize them if we want to pay attention to them. Emotional and behavioral differences, issues of physical performance, technology use, cognitive abilities. Do you think males and females differ in cognitive abilities? Because it matters what you think as a teacher, because you're going to treat your students differently based on your perceptions and beliefs about males, females, blacks, whites, Asians, Hispanics, etc. It matters what your beliefs are about diverse cultures, ethnicities, races. Understand that all your students deserve an equal opportunity and treatment. There's going to be different levels of achievement sometimes with gender differences. There are some biological differences among genders that need to be paid attention to, although there's really not as much as people think. How gender bias affects students is what's important. If you're a female teacher, you may call them girls more often and not realize it, or you may call them boys. If you're, regardless of what gender you are, if you think boys are better at math, you may be more likely, if you want to move class along, you may be more likely to call on your male students. You need to think about if you have equal expectations from your males and females. In terms of intelligence, Alfred Binet was asked by the French government to develop a measure of intelligence. He called it IQ, or intelligence quotient. A global index of people's intelligence derived from one of several different standardized tests attempting to measure intelligence. This is not your standard Facebook IQ test. We're talking about something that is standardized and professional here. But he wasn't the only one. He did have a test, and it's a pretty good one. But we can look at intelligence in different ways. through the eyes of Charles Spearman, who had the single trait intelligence theory, general intelligence. The idea that intelligence is a single trait that people have in varying degrees. Gardner came up with the idea that we have intelligence in different areas, in different ways: verbal, linguistic, body kinesthetic, musical and rhythmic, intrapersonal, logical, mathematic, naturalistic, interpersonal, visuospatial. If you want to pause for a second and rate yourself 1 to 10, 10 being highest, on each one of those 8 categories, and see how you do. See which ones are your strengths. Maybe you have one that stands out among the others. Maybe you have a weak area. And what is intrapersonal versus interpersonal? Of course, interpersonal is interacting with others, social abilities. Interpersonal is being metacognitive, thinking, and being self-aware. Logical, mathematical. I just covered all of these. Okay, intelligence can be thought of as a process through this triarchic theory of successful intelligence proposed by Sternberg, who had the componential intelligence, the ability to think abstractly and process information effectively, is an analytic process, whereas experiential intelligence is the ability to formulate new ideas, to combine seemingly unrelated facts or information. That's a creative process. And then contextual intelligence is the ability to adapt to changing environmental conditions and to shape the environment in order to maximize your strengths and compensate for your weaknesses. The triarchic theory of successful intelligence. Of course, he's saying you need all 3 of these. You need to have componential intelligence, experiential, and contextual intelligence. And then you've all heard about learning styles, and the idea that we, I'm a visual learner, or I'm a kinesthetic learner, or I'm an auditory learner. Well, the truth is that we may have one area that we learn a little better in, but the best teachers will provide learning opportunities in multiple ways. So we're going to try this visually, auditorially. Now we're going to put it into practice. You're going to use your hands. We're going to provide various ways for you to learn the material. It helps you to practice it, to repeat the process, but it also helps you to take it in multiple ways, to take it in, to take the information in. And it really is not about trying to meet all the students, and find their special learning style, but rather to hit all the learning styles for all students. So if you do want to take the viewpoint that we have different learning styles, are they traits or are they developed preferences? And if so, can we help develop students' preferences to be something else? Are we born with them, is really what we're saying, or are they learned? And what are you? Research shows that we are predominantly, all of us, visual. Okay. Here's some learning style distinctions from shallow processing to deep processing. And we see on the left side of this triangle what we remember, which is, of course, the percentage gets higher as we go towards deeper processing. And as we, on the right side of the triangle, we see we're becoming from passive learners to more active learners. From just reading, to hearing the words, to looking at an exhibit, to watching a movie about it, to looking at pictures, to watching a demonstration, to seeing something happen on location, to participating in a discussion, to giving a talk on it, to doing a dramatic demonstration. That's when we're really becoming active learners rather than just receivers of information. We're producing information. We're becoming involved with the information. Simulating the real thing and then actually doing the real thing. Finally, the role of the teachers in an inclusive classroom identifies exceptionalities, modifies instruction appropriately, and helps groups collaborate, and then develops acceptance and belongingness in the classroom, letting each student, no matter how diverse, know that they are included, that they are part of the community, learning that each student is valued and what they bring to the table is a valuable aspect. Of course, this goes back to the self-determination theory that we talked about earlier with DC and Ryan, I believe in section 2, where they talked about 3 main components we need to be motivated: autonomy, relatedness, and connectedness. And we need these things to be a motivated classroom, to be a community, and our students need these things. The other thing I'll point out is that I don't always do a perfect job of this, but I'm trying to model this right now at least. As you teach, make connections to things you've already taught, just as I just did. So say, look, we're in section so-and-so. Remember how this, look at how this relates to what we talked about back in section 2. Always be making connections for students to help them as they are trying to make this network of information into one solid idea of, in this case, educational psychology. Help them put the pieces together. You're the one who already has the information somewhat organized. You need to help your students, if you've already got an organizational tool for it, help them connect the dots. Thank you very much. Next, I'll be with you for assessment in the classroom. See you soon.